I want to end this lecture with what I call a cynical application of present value. The story I'm about to tell you is true, or at least most of it is, and I hope it is amusing, but it illustrates a very serious economic principle. This is a picture of my daughter. She's a beautiful little girl, and I love her to death, but I have to admit that when she was born, she was a bit of a disappointment. This has nothing to do with the fact that she is a girl. I already had 2 boys at that time, and I was ready for a break. No, I was disappointed because she was born in the month of January. You see, in the United States, the government subsidizes the cost of children by giving you a tax credit for each child that lived in your home during that year. When you file a tax return, you get to reduce the amount that you pay the government by $1,000 per child. One key feature of this tax credit is that it doesn't matter what day the child was born in the year. Even if my daughter were born 1 second before midnight on December 31st, I could have reduced my taxes for the entire year by $1,000. However, since she was born in January, I had to wait for the following year's tax return to claim that tax credit. Now, I was aware of this detail of American tax law well before my daughter was born. Remember, I already had 2 sons at the time. And I was also aware that doctors can administer certain chemicals to a pregnant woman to induce labor. So I asked my wife to talk to her doctor about whether we could do that to make sure that our daughter was born in December. Unfortunately, the doctor told her that he could not give her those drugs more than 2 weeks before the baby was due. Consequently, she was born in January, and I had to wait an extra year to get my $1,000. So at the time she was born, I had a very pressing question. How much did she cost me? The doctor told me it would cost me nothing. The reason he gave me is that you can only collect the tax credit until your child is 22. So if my daughter had been born in December, I would simply run out of credits 1 year earlier than if she had been born in January. But I told the doctor that he was demonstrating his own ignorance because he was ignoring the time value of that money. I told him that if the going interest rate were 5%, then the 1 year delay in collecting my tax credit would reduce its present value to $1,000 divided by 1.05. That's just over $950, so it cost me $50 for my daughter to be born in January. But when I got home, I realized that I had just demonstrated my own ignorance. That's because it wasn't just that one tax credit that was being delayed. Every single tax credit for the next 22 years would be delayed by 1 year. This meant that my daughter was costing me more than I had suspected. So I made a table to show the doctor the costs. The first row shows the cash flow of tax credits I would have received if she had been born in December of 2007. The bottom row shows the cash flow of tax credits I actually received since she was born in January of 2008. As you can see, the only difference between the 2 cash flows is that in the first row I get a $1,000 credit in 2008, whereas in the bottom row it's as though I have to wait until 2030 to get that tax credit. When we take the present value of all the tax credits in the table, we can see that if I received the credit in 2008, it would have been worth the full $1,000 to me. But by receiving it in 2030 instead, its present value falls to about $342. So we can see that as a result of my doctor not being willing to provide my wife with the necessary medication, my daughter cost me almost $660 in delayed tax credits. Now, this is an amusing story, but there is a real lesson here for firms. Anytime there is a cash flow that gets delayed, that delay is very expensive because it affects the present value of every payoff in that cash flow. As an example, consider BP's Deepwater Horizon, an oil drilling platform that caught fire and sank in 2010. This was a very costly incident for BP. It lost an asset worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It had to pay for costs of cleanup and compensation to businesses around the Gulf of Mexico who were negatively affected, and it has agreed to pay a $2.4 billion penalty to the U.S. government. But beyond these costs, BP has not been able to extract oil from that deposit for more than 4 years. This means that a planned cash flow has been disrupted, and every payoff in that cash flow has incurred over 4 years of delay.